Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this the first session this afternoon in this International Rail Summit 10, and a very important topic, and indeed a very illustrious panel we have for this particular session about achieving net zero mobility by 2050. Guiding us through this particular session for the next couple of hours, I'm delighted to introduce Christian Kern, who is someone I've known and we've known in the railway community for some considerable time now, notwithstanding the fact that he was, of course, the Chancellor, or the former Federal Chancellor of Austria. He was also the CEO of OBB, and now is the managing partner of the technology company, the Blue Minds Company. Christian, I wish you well for this session. I wish everybody in the session a very fruitful discussion, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Simon, for the kind introduction. I would like to take the opportunity to introduce you to today's panel. We have chosen the title Achieving Net Zero Mobility Actions to Take Right Now, and we will discuss that with a very esteemed speaker panel. We will start with two keynote speeches, which will be given by Commissioner Vălean and Mr. Daven, the General Director of UIC. And after that, we will move and turn to the panel speakers. After that, again, we will pick some questions which could be sent in via email from the audience. I would like to introduce you in person to our speakers today. Mrs. Vălean is a veteran of European policy. No need to mention that she is the Commissioner of Transport, and she is running a very ambitious, very promising agenda on behalf of the Commission. We have the second speaker, Mr. Daven, who is Director General of the UIC, which you know is the technical association of the European and worldwide railways. We have on our panel Mr. Michael Peter. He's the CEO of Siemens Mobility, now the challenged champion of European rail technology companies. We have Karen van Gloise, who is the General Secretary of Polis, a very important institution lobbying the future of specifically urban transportation. And we have also Mr. Schwemmlein, the founder and CEO of Flixbus, which I don't need to introduce specifically because he has the status of a nightmare of the traditional railway providers. And so I'm looking very much forward to his contributions. Perhaps I would have a few words of introduction and just explain a little bit on my own biography. I have been the CEO of Austrian Railways. Simon mentioned that when I took over the position, all my friends said, okay, that's not a good idea. Are you completely nuts? This is going to be definitely the end of a promising career. But turned out that after that, I was nominated as the Federal Chancellor of Austria. And what I'm doing right now is we have our own company, which is building and investing technology companies in the field of mobility and in the field of energy. We are doing that because we believe that there is a strong conversion across various sectors. And in that capacity, I have the privilege to work with some of the leading rail technology companies. We are basically in a comfortable situation that we are doing only stuff and things which we believe could make the world a little bit better, greener, safer, not only because this fits to our values, but even more because we strongly believe that this is the only successful business for a winning business model. And from my personal experience, I can tell you 2020 was starting as a very tough year for the whole sector because we had huge concerns that the announcements about the Green Deal might be cancelled. But what we have seen is that the megatrends of digitalization and climate change are so strong drivers that at least from our perspective, it was not a bad year at all. But the initial concern was that COVID will absorb all the attention and the financial resources away from climate change. And we have faced that the opposite is true. The efforts which are led by the European Commission have even been increased further, and Build Back Better became kind of an leading motive for the reconstruction of our companies. And we have learned in the railway industry that we have heard so many lip services in all the years, but this time it seems to be different, and rail could definitely profit from the ongoing discussions about the Green Deal perspectives. It's increased in many European countries, led by the European Union, in Germany, in the UK, also in Russia, which perhaps is running the most ambitious infrastructure extension program. We have seen that France has tied the funds for Air France to the discontinuation of the short-haul flights, which is kind of a breakthrough political measure. And we all know that this is part of a broader movement. We have seen a massive ramp-up of mobility, and we have seen literally a race of the large OEMs in the automotive sector who is going to withdraw first from internal combustion engines. But on the other hand, and this is the second issue I would like to stress, we know that there is a clear link between the ability of our industry to innovate and to implement innovations and the achievement of the climate goals. We know that we are dealing with a strong and lasting legacy system, and what we have seen in the past is a procedure where we have been trying step by step to add innovation on top of that legacy system to achieve incremental progress. A lot of achievements have been seen, but also a lot of frustrations. And preparing for our session today, I was going through some historical decisions, and I've seen that the legislation for the implementation of ERTMS was passed through 2000 on the European level in the year 2000. And today, more than 20 years later, I've just read a McKinsey report which says that we have more than 100 trained tools and systems in the German market alone, which are just loosely connected. So one of the questions we are touching today, besides the overall climate issues, is in disruptive time, is it really an appropriate means to bet on incremental changes, or do the industry have to find a way to lead progress in a different direction? Saying that, Mrs. Valian, the floor is yours, and we are looking very much forward to your presentation.
Hello, I hope you can hear me. I'm never sure. Yeah, okay, very well. So thank you very much for inviting me. Ladies and gentlemen, a short recourse to memory. In 1841, a German economist, Friedrich List, described the advantages of a transport mode recently developed in Europe, the train. List rightfully believed that the railway improved the nation's security, culture, and sense of community. It protected the markets from a possible lack of goods and kept prices low through reliable transportation. Even more, he said, the railway binds nations by ligaments and promotes an interchange of food and commodities, thus making it feel to be a unite. We all agree that this is still true. In the rail community, we also all agree that we should feel the same enthusiasm for rail as those who were the first in history to see its many benefits. 2021 is the European Year of Rail, and this is not a coincidence. It comes 1 year after the launch of the European Green Deal, and right after we adopted in December 2020 a new European Sustainable and Smart Strategy for Transport. The objective for me this year is to see rail become the driving force it once was. This traditional transport mode, enabler of the Industrial Revolution, could now play a central role in yet another fundamental transformation, one that will lead us to a sustainable, emission-free transport system. Rail is an unsung hero of clean, efficient transport, and our objectives, as outlined in our strategy, are to increase rail freight by 50% and to double high-speed rail by 2030. Rail still needs a lot of investment, but I must admit, success will be about much more than kilometers of railway track laid. We need to show shippers that the alternatives to the road are fast and reliable. We must also address missing links to improve multimodality and truly see an integrated transport system. We cannot move cargo from boats to trains if the port is not well connected with railway infrastructure. To give you an example, the Rail Baltica project is filling such gaps, connecting rail to seaports and airports while linking Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and indirectly Finland. The line will also cut travel times. Tallinn to Warsaw is expected to take less than 7 hours by rail, while it currently takes over 12 hours by road. With the EU providing 85% of current investment and having so far committed over 800 million euros, Rail Baltica is one of the EU's largest transport infrastructure projects. On the other side of the continent, just 3% of freight is currently carried by rail on the Basque-Bordeaux route. We will turn that around with new high-speed rail links that will also create a ripple effect beyond the transport sector. GDP in the Basque area alone is expected to climb by 1.3%, while we predict more than 10,000 new jobs. Indeed, rail needs well-developed and well-maintained physical infrastructure and modern rolling stock, which is expensive. But we want a better return on investment. We need to add a digital layer. Rail must modernize through digitalization and innovation. We need a rapid rollout of ERTMS, and let me tell you why. An advanced digital traffic management system is a step towards automatic continuous train operations. It provides interoperability within the network, and at the same time, it reduces maintenance costs for operators and increases safety. The European Union has been and remains committed to supporting the deployment of ERTMS. For example, the ETCS Level 2 generic design project funded under our Connecting Europe facility will serve as a basis for the rollout of the Belgian railway network. We also need a modern timetabling process and the exchange of real-time information on trains' composition and position. We need innovations that bring automation to train operations, traffic management, and couplings. Rail must become the first option for passengers. But today, from a passenger perspective, each transport mode operates almost in isolation. Planning and buying tickets for multimodal journeys remains cumbersome, and this must change. When thinking about journeys, we need to remember that for passengers to take a train, they must first get to a railway station. And to choose the train to go to the airport, they have to have good, reliable rail connections and easy access to train tickets. There has been progress with some mobility as a service or the so-called MaaS platforms launching operations, but these services are few and far between, which hinders the societal, economic, and the environmental benefits of multimodality. To get to the next level, we need greater coordination and interaction between different transport operators, including data sharing. On our side, we will address the technical challenges related to standardization and data sharing and the market challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll come back to what Friedrich List said in 1841. Railway binds national by ligaments, thus making it feel to be a unit. More than 1.5 centuries later, in a globalized economy, we still need these iron and steel ligaments as they make us feel united in Europe and beyond. Thank you very much.
So, dear Commissioner Valian, thank you very much for your interesting presentation. Unfortunately, you need to leave right now, so we will have not the opportunity to discuss it, but definitely there are some interesting inputs we are going to touch in our debate later on.
I'll follow your discussions, and I'm looking also forward for the next opportunity to engage in a a debate with you. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for your contribution. Now, Mr. Deven, you are the next speaker on our agenda. The floor is yours, and may I invite you to start with your presentation.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to express for UIC in this forum. Well, I think we had a very interesting presentation from the Commissioner Valean, and basically what she said is that there is definitely a future for rail. Rail is coming from the first industrial revolution, as she said. And what I would try to demonstrate today is that in a way we are at a turning point. Well, 2021 for UIC, the Global Railways Association, is quite a particular year. First of all, because 2021 will be the centenary of our institution. We are providing technical documents, specification, and standards for the industry since 1921. And we intend to continue in these new times, and we intend to provide indeed technical documents and specifications that will be adapted to a shift to a net zero mobility. 2021 is also the European Year of Rail, and that's also quite symbolic. But I would like to insist mainly on the fact that 2021 is the second year after the pandemic rules. And I think that's a very important question, because, well, we all hope that by the end of this year we will resume, let's say, to normal or new normal activities. A lot have been said about that. But I do think that what we said during this period, as UIC is a global institution, we have seen that all over the world. We ran last year a COVID-19 task force with more than 70 countries and 18 international organizations. And what we were able to see is that it changed completely our way of apprehending future, because what we saw together during this difficult period is that indeed our interconnected economy and our interconnected and global society, it's more fragile and vulnerable to unpredictable shocks than what we thought before. So I do think, as it was said by Christian Kern in his introductory speech, that we could have feared that all what happens in 2020 will slow down the pace to decarbonation. But I think it should be the contrary, because basically what we saw during last year is our vulnerability to the shock. And it's quite clear that in the coming years, and if you look to, for example, the UN literature, there will be more shocks, there will be more events that will be unexpected. And that's main words for the years to come are resilience and a sense of urgency. We need to evolve, we need to change rapidly our way to understand economic and our way to understand transport. So for UIC, it's absolutely crucial, because we think that railway should become the backbone of sustainable mobility. When we speak about backbone, it means two things. It means that we have to increase our internal efficiency to be more efficient, more seamless, and also to increase dramatically our capacity to interconnect with other modes of transport, and also to serve our fellow citizens in a very diverse way, and above all, to be what we call a good neighbor, both for biodiversity, for noise, and for accessibility. And what I will try to develop here is, first of all, this question of developing. We are developing ERTMS for almost 20 years now, but we have still no real European network. And we need to make desirable a change of paradigm in transport to a more frugal approach. I will perhaps start with the later, make modal shift desirable, and speaking about the main technical breakthrough that we have to integrate within our different networks. And I will perhaps, before entering into more detail, to this word network. Indeed, railways were, during the first industrial revolution, the first highly integrated technical networks before electricity, before telecommunications. And indeed, we have a huge legacy system. But what is happening today is that there is a series of technological breakthrough that will allow to our different networks to become more clever. Well, those enablers are known, and there's digitalization, 5G, automation, artificial intelligence, and the question of being able to handle cyber risk. What is new to my eyes is that there is a commitment of our community to implement all those game changers and to implement them rapidly and in a way that can change the perception of transport. Well, as it was said, speed was not the characteristic of innovation in transport. On the other hand, there is a few examples of the capacity of the industry to deploy large innovation. For example, GSMR, which is a digital and telecommunication part of ERTMS, has been effectively deployed on 200,000 kilometers of tracks around the world. So GSMR is, as a matter of fact, a product from UAC, and we are working on the next one, which is called FRMCS, Future Rail Mobile Communication System, which is basically implementing 5G for railways. And we hope that we can have the same success and have a rapid implementation and generalization of 5G. This will be absolutely crucial because if we want to indeed interconnect with other modes, if we want to accelerate the rhythm of innovation and be able indeed to have an actual automation of all the systems, we need to have this data backbone. And for UIC, it will be very important, as we are issuing operational standards, that those innovations can be deployed with network philosophy. What is network philosophy? Is to be sure that indeed when we deploy an innovation, let's say 5G or let's say automation, we have a sufficient level of standardization on the implementation of the process to say, being sure that what Germany is doing with ATO is fully compatible with what France is doing. So, for example, as you know, in Germany, there is a very strong program which is called Starke Schienen, which is about to inject digitalization in the whole network. We want to be sure through UIC standardization activities that indeed, from an operational point of view, the interconnection will be ensured. But that is only, let's say, the internal part of this backbone thing. We have also to think about interconnection with other modes. And for that, I think the sector is really very actively working to offer to the end user, passenger and freight, seamless access to a portfolio of sustainable mobility. To take an example, in UIC, we are working on a new system for timetabling, which is called Open Sales and Distribution Model, OSDM, that will allow indeed the integration, easy integration of data that will come from all the other modes, the integration of the ticket vendors, and the integration of the newcomers. So that will be a step forward to mobility as a service. And same thing, we are working very hard to unify the different digital platforms that are existing today in the rail freight industry to have a single European digital platform that will not be a cluster, that will be able to also interconnect with the networks that are developing in Asia and in Russia. So this figure of network will be absolutely central. To continue on this idea, what will be very important for us as an industry is to make modal shift desirable. When I say modal shift, not only modal shift to rail, but modal shift to urban cycling, taxis, light rail, bus. We have also a bus company here around the table, and tomorrow with automated vehicle. We need to be sure that indeed rail will be an open platform and that we change the representation of the general audience towards railways. And I think one of the main ideas that we can put forward is that it's a frugal mode of transport. And what we have seen, and I'll come back again to this crisis of COVID-19, is that rail has been resilient. We have been able to continue to operate freight. It has been absolutely crucial because, you need less drivers for a train as for a series of trucks. So it has been absolutely crucial for having the goods continuing to flow in our economies. Same thing for the main passenger services. And I think what people have been able to appreciate by force, actually, is that we are a frugal mode, well, obviously in energy, everybody knows that, but also in consuming public space. And I think in our cities, it will be more and more important to draw a perspective where we should get rid of pollution and congestion, and we shall be using this rail backbone as the solution. But for that, we have to set up the new capabilities I was trying to explain in my last slide, and I'm quite optimistic that now there is really among the railway undertaking a very clear commitment to implement those new services. And well, we say that in UIC for quite a couple of years. We have now to associate to rail new words like flexibility, simplicity, and liberty. And that will be possible if we are open and we are working in association with other modes. And I will then finish my presentation with the last idea, which is developing a sense of urgency. Well, a sense of urgency, obviously, for railways. Well, I already said that our CEOs are truly committed to have truly a change in the way our fellow citizens will understand and use the railway system, but also a sense of urgency because this COVID-19 crisis has shown, as I say, the fragility of our systems. And we know that starting from basically now, and as the Paris Agreement have shown that there is a trajectory for trying to avoid global warming that will harm the general ecosystem, that we have entered into a non-linear environment, a non-linear period. And that has a quite precise meaning. That means that everything that we will not do today, that we will not do fast, that will be increasingly difficult to do in the following years. That means that we are not confronted to a universe where is basically linear or eternal, like perhaps it was in the 19th century, where we had an idea that the progress will be completely linear, but in an environment that we will have to choose rapidly the more efficient, the faster, and the most frugal mode, at least for transport. So I think that gives to the railways quite a challenge, but also quite an opportunity to demonstrate that we are definitely part of the solution. And I do think that at the end of the day, what we have to do in this difficult period is to be sure that we actually choose to finance transformational projects at regional and global level. What is a transformational project? That's a project that will have in the short run the bigger impact. And definitely all what I was speaking about, digitization, seamless traffic, and so far and so on, these are a part of projects that we should concentrate on. Why? Because as it's about increasing the efficiency, and basically the efficiency for a rail system, it's the throughput, the capacity of the system, of many passengers, of many freight units you are able to switch. It's indeed able to have a rapid model shift that will allow to achieve the goals in terms of aiming to a net zero economy. I would like to conclude in saying, well, basically three things. That's the whole industry around the UIC is committing to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. We have signed a pledge that most of our networks now have signed in Europe and elsewhere. In particular, Russia has recently signed it. And what is important to say is that we updated this 2015 pledge in 2019 because we were in advance to the target. So we strengthened a little bit the objective. Well, the objective remains the same, to be able to reach carbon neutrality in 2050, but we will go faster to this carbon neutrality target. And we have created a specific task force that will be dedicated to streamline the efforts of the community. And I would like to conclude in saying that everything that I said is also has to be summarized into very clear directions. And with our member, we are working on the new normal white papers that UIC will issue normally this summer. All our members worldwide are working on this paper with the help of Berger Consulting. And what we will try to show are the tendency. Do we will have disruption, or do we have an acceleration of the existing tendency? And in this case, what kind of acceleration? And the second very important event that I would like to pinpoint is that on the 30th of November, we will have a symposium for our centenary, and the theme will be relatively simple: which railways in 5, 10, and 15 years. And according to what I said about this idea of changing expectation and on accelerating innovation, we will try to draw worldwide what could be the roadmap for innovation for railways. So that will be the end of my presentation. I hope I wasn't too long, and I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francois, for your very interesting and visionary presentation. I think this opens a lot of space for interesting discussions. I would like now to turn to Mr. Peter, who is the CEO of Siemens Mobility. And I have been watching what you have done yesterday. You have been presenting the new night trains of Austrian Railways, gorgeous trains, which is definitely not exaggerated. And it was really funny and kind of a déjà vu for me, because the acquisition of DB's Deutsche Bahn's night train network was the last decision I have taken as the CEO of ÖBB. And I remember the press conference where I have been showing the mock-ups of the future night trains, which you now have built. It was really interesting, and you may apologize. My wife was also a former Siemens executive. And I showed her proudly the pictures of the new trains and told her that, that from 2016 to December 2021, now they are going to start operation. And her answer was, okay, but what have the guys done in the meantime? Because it took more than 5 years. And what I would like to indicate is that it's always difficult to explain an outsider the complexity of our industry. I have seen tenders for long distance trains which have been imposing to the OEMs more than 17,000 detailed requirements for the trains, which makes the whole story immensely complicated. And I would like to draw finally your attention again to the title of our panel, which is Achieving Net Zero Mobility, Net Zero, not emission-free, but Net Zero Mobility, Actions to Take Right Now. And looking at the title, what comes to my mind is that not sure if this isn't a little bit ridiculous, because we are talking about actions we need to take in the next few months, perhaps in the next few years, which will come into effect by the year 2015. And we are doing that in the light of a severe crisis, which might erase the foundations of human civilization. So it seems to be really a lack of ambition. And what I would like to ask you is, what can you do as an industrial leader? What can the industry at all do to lead the way to overachieve a more ambitious agenda and targets?
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, can you hear me? I had a little microphone problems in the beginning.
Yeah,
okay.
Works.
Well, then let me start with the compliment, Mr. Khan. I think you took a very good decision when you pushed the night trains back then, and I think it was a courageous decision. And I think these are the type of decisions where we are in need right now, because you're absolutely right. We are running out of time. And much has been said, but let me summarize a couple of points. Maybe we actually have courageous targets in Europe to double high-speed traffic by 2030, triple it by 2050. That the question is, of course, is that enough, as you rightfully mentioned? And we are indeed dealing with two of the most fundamental challenges of our times, and maybe of all the times. CO2 global warming is really threatening our planet. And we need to find a solution that not only reduces CO2, but at the same time, I would also like to underline, we need a solution that actually allows affordable, clean, and seamless transportation to all of the people, because transportation is and cannot be something for only a fortunate few people, but it is the backbone of developing the wealth and the standard of living that we are having, and also developing the peace that we are enjoying, especially in Europe. Cities will continue to grow. We assume that in 2050, 70% of the people will live in cities. If you just think about Europe a little bit, and it's the same everywhere in the world, cities were created because they create opportunity for people. And this will continue to be so. In Germany, you have cities that are specialized in banking, others in trading, others in fashion, others in politics or high tech. So these cities were founded and grew around opportunities for people, and people will continue to move to cities because people seek opportunities. So we have to resolve a couple of issues, I believe. We have to connect cities with each other, and here again, across borders. And we have to obviously solve the problem of traffic in the city. Now, I do believe that technology is a vital part of the solution. We can definitely not get twice as many trains on the tracks by building twice as many lines and putting twice as many steel tracks into our continent. Then we will probably still be busy in 100 years, because nowadays to build a new line is a lot of process, a long process. So digitalization will play a key role, first of all, to increase the capacity of the existing infrastructure and increase it quickly. And sometimes we see the numbers and we think, well, this is a huge number. But you really have to compare this with drilling one little tunnel or building one little bridge, or to have one high-speed connection added as long as 500 kilometers. Then these numbers that we spend actually into digitalization, increasing capacity by modernizing what we have, is actually tiny. And here I'd like to remind, if you pull up any statistics and you compare what's been invested in increasing the road capacity in the last 20 years, outnumbers by far, obviously, what has been invested in railroads. In the next 20 years, we have to think about changing it in the opposite way. We need more railroad traffic. On the rolling stock, of course, also we need solutions that attract people. We want to pull the people in the trains. We cannot push them into this mode of transportation, so they need to be comfortable, but they also need to use much less energy and going probably with less noise emissions, have higher availability. So also here, the digitalization technology plays a huge part. And last but not least, it was mentioned previously, the seamless part of it, make it easy to use. Buy tickets that can cover several modes of transportation, including the last mile, but also crossing the borders. Let me get back to the time aspect that you rightfully mentioned. The target is to halve CO2 emissions by 50% in emissions by 2030, and then halve it again. And that's for the Paris climate targets. And traffic is 25% of CO2 emissions globally. So traffic must follow the exact same path, if not be faster, because it is probably easier to make it CO2 neutral than other problems that we also have, like warming or air conditioning, because obviously trains can run on electricity that is produced green. But what we always forget is in 2030, half emissions is not meant to be consuming exactly what we're consuming today, and then in 2030 going to zero. It's actually meant to be a linear way down. And if we just continue emitting what we're emitting today for 6 more years, we have consumed the complete budget available. And that's an accumulative budget because that CO2 stays in the atmosphere for several thousand years, I understand. So actually, we should have started yesterday to make changes. And we cannot wait till 2030 to all of a sudden then have a solution there. We have already missed our chance. Hence, I believe it's extremely important that we use our Corona recovery monies now wisely and invest them actually in the type of solution we want to see in 5 years, and not that we just spend money to pour concrete. And there, I do think that the European Commission and also the nations, the individual countries, are actually putting a lot of focus on investing in the right things, in the sustainable things, in the digital solutions. Two things I think that we will discuss about. I've mentioned, I think capacity can be greatly increased with technology. Let me just mention that in Austria, we went into the cloud with the first interlockings. So it is possible to have a whole country with one interlocking controlled, all the data of a whole country available in one data center. Germany today has 2,500 interlockings with relay technology, electronic interlockings, all different technologies. They all work and they're very, very safe, but what they don't do is they don't give you data transparency. It's not an effective way possible to manage, the most effective way to manage the network. But the two things I think that we need to discuss that need a much more political support is homologation, in my opinion. It cannot be that we buy nice little trains like the Nightjet that you mentioned, and it's really difficult to get homologation for different countries. It's not as easy as saying, tomorrow we will run the train from Vienna to Paris. Every time you want to pick a new destination, you go through a whole entire process and program again of homologation, putting another onboard unit into it so it can use the legacy systems in the countries. And that brings me straight to my second point. If we want to have a chance, we must implement ETCS everywhere now. We cannot afford to buy a locomotive for 4 million euros or whatever it is and put onboard units in for almost 1 million. And some rolling stock, we put 5, 6, 7 onboard units in, just because the countries have not established ETCS on the lines everywhere. And then sometimes you go into the country in ETCS, but the last 50 kilometers are then a local system. This makes absolutely no sense. That's a waste of money. And I think these are two things that we really, beside all the other issues, need to put the focus on.
Yeah, thank you very much for the interesting explanations. I have a lot of questions now in my head, but we will come back to it later and start the discussion. You have stressed the importance of the cities, which is definitely something which becomes even more and more urgent because of demographic trends. Karen van Kluise is an expert on that subject. She knows more about that than anybody I know. Karen, so what is an appropriate recipe to tap into all these issues which have been mentioned by Mr. Peter?
Well, definitely there's no silver bullet. Let's be clear about that. And good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me on this panel. And thank you for your flattering words, Christian. Well, the role of urban mobility in achieving net zero mobility clearly is going to be big, because we see that urban mobility accounts for 40% of all CO2 emissions of road transport and up to 70% of other pollutants from transport. So it is clear that cities hold many keys when it comes to the much needed transport transformation and the decarbonization as well of the transport sector. But the climate challenge is not the only challenge, unfortunately, that our cities are facing. There's air pollution, there's road safety, there's congestion. And then on top of that, we have this global challenge as well. But what is clear is that we need an integrated and a multimodal approach, and that's also aligned with what Francois was saying earlier. If we want to tackle the multiple challenges that I just mentioned that are facing urban mobility, we really need this integrated approach. And a tool that we, with our cities, are using, and that the Commission also has been promoting extensively and has been training cities on, is a sustainable urban mobility plan. It really allows cities to develop a long-term integrated vision beyond political election cycles as well, with clear targets that they set and combining integrated packages of measures that tick several boxes and reach several goals in one go. So this is really instrumental. When we talk about a sustainable urban mobility ecosystem, for us, that means a system where public transport and active travel are the backbone. And that's also very aligned with what Francois was saying, and public transport being road and rail, obviously, in an urban context. But we also need a radical, really a drastic modal shift away from the private car in our urban environments. But that also means that we need to offer valuable alternatives to that private car. And the need for sustainable mobility modes to join forces is higher than ever. So public transport, active travel, shared mobility services, they really need to join forces and complement each other in a way that they offer a valuable and attractive alternative to the private car. So multimodality in that sense also requires intermodality, and indeed the seamlessness that Michael also mentioned across the different modes that are being offered in an urban environment. And when we talk about seamlessness, this has many different dimensions. The digital dimension and the digital integration is talked about a lot these days with regard to mobility as a service, offering all these different modes in one nice app for the user to make use of. But at the same time, we see that the rollout of MaaS has not advanced as much as we would like to, and we can come back to that later. There are several reasons for that. But we shouldn't forget, next to this fancy and innovative digital integration, that the first thing we need in order for MaaS to become possible is physical integration as well. Integration on the ground in our cities, interchanges and stations where the different modes come together and can be easily combined, and where you can easily switch from one to the other. And beyond the big stations and interchanges, what we see popping up more and more in our cities are also smaller mobility hubs at short distance from each other across the city, urban and suburban, where different shared mobility modes are being offered, for example. And to have this good integration also between the traditional public transport providers and the more new mobility service providers, to have such a good integration, we'll also have to explore new business models and new types of public-private partnerships. And also, it's important to do that in a way that we have a very clear picture of the respective impacts of the different services and modes, and make sure that the shared mobility services complement public transport, for example, and mass transit in a way that it doesn't compete with them, but rather fills the service gap that can never be met by mass transit, either because of off-peak periods or specific needs of specific target groups, or areas where public transport or mass transit is simply not efficient. I think there are really excellent examples also coming from the railway sector. Let me mention the Swiss railways, for example, and they are really investing also in establishing partnerships with micromobility operators, for example, both in a physical and digital way. Physical by offering hubs across their stations where you can easily switch from the train onto a micromobility device to cover that last urban mile, but also digital integration of these modes into their MaaS app. So that's really, I think, the way forward for the different sustainable mobility modes to come together. At the same time, while we work hard on making all these alternatives attractive, we really have to disincentivize car use as well. And we won't make it if we just offer carrots. We really have to work with sticks, even though it's politically very sensitive and challenging sometimes. But it's really high time that we internalize the external cost linked to the use of the private car in cities, and the burden they bring to society in terms of air pollution, space pollution, the cost to people's health, the economic cost, and the cost to quality of life. So more and more cities are introducing all kinds of pricing measures, all kinds of urban vehicle access regulation schemes. So this is really instrumental in going forward. It would be wrong to expect that MaaS is going to solve everything. It's not because you offer a nice app that people are going to miraculously change behavior in favor of sustainability. It's not that simple, unfortunately. So we really have to work with those sticks as well. And just to conclude my opening remarks, of course, we very much welcome the European Year of Rail and the European ambition as well to double high-speed rail by 2030. But we also want to highlight the importance of recognizing the implications for cities here. Cities are not just a place of arrival for these high-speed connections as well. We will have to make sure that there is dedicated infrastructure and good interchanges that are embedded and integrated in the local urban fabric, that the link is established with the urban nodes and the interaction between the urban and interurban role that cities are playing from a transport perspective. And that good connections are provided also when people arrive in a city, get off that high-speed train and then have to get onto other services in already very saturated networks in many cases. So also there, it will be important to indeed invest and finance further developments from an urban perspective as well. And as Michael also highlighted, the Recovery and Resilience Funds should be used wisely in that respect. Let's not put all the money into the recovery of the aviation and car industries, but really focus on sustainable mobility and a green recovery out of the current crisis.
Thank you very much, Karin. I would like to turn now to Mr. Schwemmlein, and I just remembered the days when the long-distance buses in Europe have been ramped up, and I have been in these days the chairman of CER, and we have been discussing how to deal with the new kind of competition, and clearly the answer was we need a stronger regulation preventing you from entering the market. But unfortunately, it failed because obviously people liked what you have been doing. And then the second answer was, okay, then let's copy it. But again, this failed because we have not been successfully implementing such business models in many railways. But now we have a kind of a coexistence between long distance buses and trains. But what you are doing right now, Mr. Schwemmlein, is something which is a little bit humiliating for the traditional operators, because you're now starting to attack them in their home turf and entering also the train business. And I'm not sure if you know that, but there is a railway saying, a famous one, which is, how can you achieve a small fortune? And the answer is, first you need a big fortune, and then you found a railway company. So I'm looking forward to explanations why you believe that you can do better, and how this contributes to your overall climate strategy, which you have deployed in Flixbus.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Kern. And actually, yes, we have a long-standing history together. I think at the end, you summarized it very well. It's a very good coexistence. And we, with Flixbus, we now are operating in 30 countries, and we are providing mobility for a lot of people. And it was always in our DNA to make it sustainable and then, on the other hand, affordable. And I think that's a combination that's crucial to have a real volume shift towards shared mobility. And there won't be a one size fits all. And I think when I remember the initial discussions on bus deregulation in many markets, it was about that's going to be the end of rail. It never was. Rail is prospering more than ever, despite now obviously the COVID dip. But nevertheless, there was no end of rail. It was very beneficial. So the competition between bus and rail was something that really challenged both modes of transport and made a better combined transport system, and drawing more people into shared services and bus and rail. And I think this was always our game plan. We invest in a modern, safe fleet. So we have really cutting edge technology, and we're also exploring future technologies, e-buses, hydrogen, and so on. And we always have seen bus and rail complementary. That's why we go with FlixTrain into the rail system, and we want to contribute to the vision of the European Union and towards climate neutrality. And this is something where we see rail as a real important piece. We, of course, do Greenpeace energy and try to have 100% renewable energy. And I want to underline, I agree a lot with what the speakers ahead of me have been saying, and that's a little bit counterintuitive if you're the bus guy on a rail summit. So one thing is, I agree that rail has in Europe to be the backbone of the mobility system in many dimensions. But nevertheless, no backbone works with a lot of other bones. So a backbone alone won't be sufficient. And the only thing I ask is we have to broaden our perspective, and buses, and I mean, Karen mentioned it brilliantly, we need an integrated view, an intermodal view, and we need the physical opportunities to interconnect between different modes of transport, between different modes of shared transport. And buses and trains are really not enemies, not even only competitors. I think we are combined the only way how we get people out of their cars. And in many cities we serve across Europe and the world, Flixbus is the only shared mobility provider for long distance that is available. This is even true for the majority of our networks because we serve a lot of small cities. And this is something where we really see the future in combining rail and bus, and not necessarily always in one company, but really across the industry, to have a sustainable option for everyone and get people out of the cars, even the people who have a little bit less money and maybe have to bet on a bus and not always can afford the high-speed rail. I think for us, what is very important is we are, as you mentioned rightly, a child of an open market, and this is in our DNA. We believe that that an open market fosters innovation in favor of the consumer, and I think we have proven that over the last 7 years we have been active. And this is something where we, of course, in a European context, ask for a real proper and fair functioning single market. And I mean, the initial, of course, reaction is we want to have it as it is today. But I think if we want to really push for climate neutrality, a lot of more shared transport, we need open markets. We need, on the one hand, on bus open markets, but we also need it on rail. And this is something where we have intense discussion, of course, with the one or other state railway. But we believe it's a beneficial situation when you have new innovation coming in the market, which will drive volume and take people out of the cars. So this is something where we really urge the European Union to set the framework that we can bring this innovation to the markets. And the other one is obviously, and I mean, Siemens on the manufacturer side, but I'm also looking at other OEMs in different modes of transport, also in the bus industry. We need clear new ways to technology which enables us as operators to be fully sustainable and 100% CO2 free. We are, as an operator, technology agnostic. We want to deliver on our targets to be on a zero emission. And therefore, we also need the support of the European manufacturers. And I urge also here a bit in the context of a global challenge that we have. If we as Europeans don't take the chance, then there will be people who take the chance. And we have a lot of discussions all across the globe on like new technology concepts. And my last and concluding remark, obviously, on the COVID-19 crisis, which hit us as all other mobility operators pretty hard. And obviously, it's something which has been top of mind now for about 12 months now. But we are shifting our view forward. We want to stick to the targets we have. We want, together with a lot of other players in industry, reform and rethink mobility. And we think it's a greater challenge than ever. People have been going back to private cars, and it's our role as operators, as an industry, to fight for these people and make them an offer which is sustainable, collective, and affordable. And this needs more than one option and a very good interlinkage between these options. A lot of investment in infrastructure, I fully support that, but it also needs good conditions to operate, and which means an open market, a single market, where innovation can prosper in favor of the consumer. This is what we are convinced will lead to reaching the climate goals of the European Commission. And so once COVID is over, people want to travel again. We want to be there. We as an industry, and I mean rail, bus, and all sustainable modes together, should be there to convince them that we have an offer for them to get on that path that was described by Michael, because I agree, we have to start now, and we have to use the rebound coming after COVID for getting on a sustainable path, because this was definitely a setback over the last 12 months. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Andre. And I would like to remind the audience that the floor is open for sending in questions, which I will pick and ask the panelists. But let me ask first one question, which is perhaps one which is really important for a lot of railway operators. We know that there is almost no industry which is as much heavy metal as traditional railway technology companies and also railway operators. So they have a long-standing history, have a lot of experts, know their business pretty well. But what we have seen right now, and specifically accelerated in the last few years, was that a lot of rolling stock procurement projects have been failing. We have seen cost overruns, we have seen massive delays, and a lot of frustration on both sides. And what I would like to understand, and perhaps Francois and Michael could respond to the question, how important do you see the transformation of traditional players on the operator side, on the technology side, to companies which have now to deal with very complex IT and software challenges due to the fact that in the past they have been just dealing with hardware issues?
Shall I start? Yeah. So there is indeed a lot of projects on the market that have been delayed. Most of them are not from Siemens, I would say, but nevertheless, I would like to give a little bit of a general view here. I think projects that are very successful, for instance, are concessions. When you have a concessionaire that is actually interested in providing a service at the best value over 30 years, and he automatically asks a company like us, give me your best product with the best life cycle cost for 30 years. And that makes a lot of ecological sense and economical sense. I think the past where a customer really defined what the bolt needs to look like, what the screw needs to look like, and this is different and that needs to be changed, is a very risky path because the specifications are thousands of pages long. And at the end of the day, every train becomes a specially built train, which maybe in the past worked, but now with all the projects on the market and the idea to double traffic, I think this is not the best way to go anymore. It prevents you from having standardized designs. It prevents you from having standardized replacement parts. And I think so there should be a clear separation, and this is part of our success model, where we went a couple of years into a new strategy and said, we want to have a platform that works, and on the platform we innovate. And of course, we call it an empty tube concept. The interior of a train should be completely free to be designed by the customer. You may have different seats or different entertainment systems, or you may have a different operational concept with more restaurants or space for children to play and all of this. But the technology really is complex as it is, and there I think lies the root cause of much of the problems. Another aspect is, again, the homologation. I think we are coming out with new requirements for homologation way too fast. So that basically every 3 years you have to design everything new. That's also not really the best approach right now if you want to go to large projects. I think what the operators probably, or what the success of the operator will determine, is actually his operational concept. And I do agree that, or do believe, they need to have a lot of knowledge in IT actually in the future, how to schedule their fleets in the most efficient way, how to provide connections. And I think Karen said a very important part. I think they are playing around with solutions to last mile, how to make the train station something completely new, where you actually find your connection easily and you jump on it and you have already the whole trip planned through, because at the end of the day, people will only use a train when the overall trip is efficient and not only if the centerpiece of it is nice. They need to get from door to door.
Thank you.
By the way, and there's maybe one more comment to Andre. I do think he had a lot of good points, actually. I do think that every mode of transportation is trying to become clean and has a different part in this really complex system. Let's just talk about cargo for a second. A fraction of the cargo is on the rail right now, and we may want to triple it, but it's still a fraction than if we triple it. So let's not think that tomorrow we will have great lives without trucks or without buses. I do think the important part is actually how you want to operate it, how you get everything clean, and how the whole system works together. And I think this really, when we think about liberating the railroad market, I think this leads me to where I think right now is the time for the governments to heavily invest in the infrastructure. And this can never be a profitable business, but create liberty on top of it for the operators to actually create these type of solutions that Karen and Andre were talking about.
Okay, thank you very much. Francois, would you like to respond on behalf of the operators?
Well, not really respond, but perhaps compliment. I think on the principle, I think we can agree. What we need is indeed more standardization, because competition and creating the European space for transport is exactly about that. Standardizing. We won't have to reinvent each time the wheel when there is a connection between, let's say, a station and public transport. So we need to be able to create those exchange places, we need to create concepts that are solid enough to be sure that they can be replicated. And when it comes to the pure backbone stuff, I was perfectly in agreement with what was said on the bus question. A backbone only exists with other bones, so we really need to interconnect. So I think there is two very important issues. One is internal. We need more standardization. We need platform. We need operational standards, and that's indeed very important that each time we are creating a new feature or new product, the authorization will be, as a matter of fact, European. So in UIC, we are working very closely with the European Railway Agency and also with the National Safety Agency to be sure that our legacy in terms of standardization can be accepted needs of conformity for authorizing the rolling stocks, meaning that it should be very easy to authorize a rolling stock at the European level. It's still not the case, but I think if all the operators are pushing in the same direction, it should improve in the coming years. And that's really something absolutely crucial. And I do think that the operating community understands that better and better. I took the example of freight during my presentation. Really, the CEOs of the freight sector are really committed to have a space where they can compete, where everything is smooth for goods delivery. And they are working, for example, to unify the very complex IT environment, which is allowing the switching of containers and wagons around Europe. So there is this understanding that there is a need to standardize. And I think there is also a good example of this necessity to have operational standards. That's one I took during my presentation, that GSMR. GSMR is already a part of ERTMS, and for that, the operators, since inception, have been able to have a very stable product. That's the result of that is that I think in Europe there is more than 1,000 kilometers that are equipped with GSMR only, not ERTMS. And ERTMS, I think, since the last figure is 6,000 kilometers. So that means that if together manufacturers and operators, we have a view of having systems that can be easily deployed and easily standardized, I think that's a path for success. We really need to have this kind of thinking. And perhaps last word, because I'm coming from more originally a long time ago from the telecommunication sector. I think there is a lot to be learned on from the telecommunication sector, because telecommunication is awfully complicated. It's perhaps more complicated than railways. But when you design a telecommunication system, you design it to be standardized by inception and to be sure that all the interconnection, and in particular the international one, are designed within the system. And I do think that's really the kind of orientation we should try to follow in the railway sector. And at least in UIC, in our standardization activities, we are really committed to this kind of process.
Thanks, Francois. May I come to another issue which have been stressed by Andre Schwemmlein when you've been saying that we will bounce back to pre-COVID levels. My question is, do you believe that the COVID crisis we have seen right now will affect in the long term the behavior of the clients of public transportation, which is something which we could detect in the cities, also on the long distance side, specifically bus and also trains? And I would appreciate very much to hear your assessment, Karin and Andres, about your outlook for the next 18 months. Will we come back as soon as the vaccination campaign have been successful, or are we facing a long-term change of public behavior?
Yes, we have tried to help our cities navigate this COVID-19 crisis over the past year, because it was indeed unprecedented. We had no roadmap to turn to. but they still had to make sure that things kept moving for those who needed essential services. And in that sense, I think public transport delivered really well and was there for those who needed it. But of course, we cannot ignore that public transport has at the same time suffered tremendously and is still suffering. We see, however, that this with every threat that this crisis has brought and is bringing, there's also an opportunity. The threats obviously being, the collapse of public transport and the massive return to the private car as safety bubble, let's say, but also opportunities in the way that our cities have been massively respacing the city streets, for example, in favor of active travel in this case, but that's equally important for cities. And this is also, that makes me optimistic, let's say. And what we shouldn't forget is that there is no single mode like public transport, which is as efficient, as sustainable, and as affordable. And as we are coming out of this crisis, I hope, we will be facing a severe economic crisis as well. So we simply have no choice. Public transport has to return because vulnerable people from an economic perspective, but also from an access perspective, will be even more vulnerable. So they need to be provided with these services. And that's one way of making sure that the recovery of public transport is simply unavoidable also from an economic perspective. The other way is what I mentioned earlier. We really have to disincentivize the alternatives. So while this crisis right now is very tangible, all the other crises that we were tackling and have been trying to tackle, unfortunately, haven't gone anywhere. We still are dealing with the climate crisis. We still are dealing with casualties on a daily basis on our roads. We are still dealing with people dying from air pollution. So there are just as many, unfortunately, people dying from that as well as from COVID-19. So it's not that these other crises are suddenly less important. So green recovery will be instrumental, and public transport will and remain the backbone. So I'm optimistic that we will recover. And coming back to the point I made earlier in terms of sustainable urban mobility plans, we saw that those cities that responded really well during the pandemic were very often cities that had good SUMPs in place. It allowed them also to accelerate measures that were planned for the coming years, put them on a fast track and roll them out in a couple of weeks and months' time. And this agility that we have seen with the public sector in this crisis from that perspective also makes me optimistic that it's not just the private sector who can be fast and agile, but also the public sector if they have to. So we really have to use this current window of opportunity and be proactive in the way we recover. And what the behavioral experts always tell us is that people are open to changing deeply rooted habits when there is a life-changing moment, and mobility habits are deeply rooted as well. And we hope that COVID-19 can also be such a life-changing moment when people had to reconsider their mobility habits and start thinking about maybe keeping some of the good things as well that have come out of this crisis in a way. And what is also very powerful in terms of winning the hearts and minds of people are letting them experience certain measures. There were temporary measures that were introduced to cover, the lockdown period, for example, additional bus lanes or more room for cyclists and pedestrians. But it could also help people experience what a city could look like, an alternative city, a more sustainable city could look like, also in terms of less air pollution, less congestion, etc. So that's also a very powerful way to make sure that the temporary measures that we introduced could also become permanent over time. And then I think the public transport sector has been investing tremendously also in additional measures in the field of health and sanitation, being very transparent about that and communicating about that in a clear way, I think is also instrumental. And studies have also shown that the actual risk on public transport for contamination or infection is not that high. So it will be very important to properly raise awareness also with our citizens in that respect.
Thanks, Andre. Obviously, your screen is frozen again, but I think you're still here.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly well. May I also direct a question to you? How do you expect the development or forecast the development in the next few months, respectively, next few years? Change of behavior of your clients? What's the question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I can give you two perspectives. On the one hand, as a concurrent, we have to come back. and it's the only option if we want to have a shot at sustainable mobility. I'm not that optimistic on that there is too much good in the COVID crisis, to be honest. I mean, if you look at the results that have been there on like recovery of mobility by mode of transport, the car is essentially back to pre-COVID level in middle of pandemic. So there is no shift towards anything which is sustainable. And I think everything, and I live in a very urban area in Munich, and I like the bike lane and so on. But what I see is people moving out of subways and getting into their own cars. So I'm super scared of the shift that has been happening in COVID, because I think, obviously, if I look on a longer horizon, we have a good opportunity to gain back these people, but it's an uphill battle. And I think COVID is a real problem for that battle that we are on. I'm per se not so pessimistic on the rail and bus industry, to be honest. So I think we have a fair chance. I would be more concerned if I would run an airline. But because then, of course, demographics will change and business travel will not come back in the way it has been before. So I think we as a bus and rail industry, we have an opportunity to gain back, but we have to work very, very hard for it. We have to deliver really good quality. We have to ensure people feel safe. We have to communicate, and we have to have an attractive offer. It will not be for free, and it definitely was a setback, not only on the cities where you see kind of same car traffic and empty subways. And if you talk to people, it's the same. It's also something that has been now kind of engraved in their thinking that, yeah, I rather take my car, I rather buy a new car. So I think there is a momentum which is not in our favor, and we have to work very hard to get it back. And on the short-term horizon, yes, I expect that there will be a start into a new normality in the second half of this year for Europe, a bit earlier for the UK and the US. And the kind of a normal world where we have an opportunity on pre-COVID levels in 22. But as said, we have to work very, very hard for that. And it's not given that all operators will make it. And it's an industry effort and not a single operator effort. But yes, I would not say scared, but this was really a hit at our efforts as an industry to become stronger and get more passengers out of cars.
Okay, thank you. So we have some questions here from the audience, which I would like to pick. The first one is a question which is related to the fleet of the operators. The question is, when are you expecting to become carbon neutral? 2050 is here quoted as a date, which seems to be pretty a long period of still running carbon engines. But I would like to hand over the question to the podium and perhaps add also how do you realistically assess the importance of hydrogen and battery-driven trains. I've understood that the European Commission is running an ambitious program to establish a very competitive hydrogen and energy storage industry. But my question is, how influential are these programs? Is this idea for the fleets of the operators? Perhaps, Mr. Peter, you're dealing with technology.
Yeah, I can start. So in Europe, roughly 50% of the railroad tracks have a catenary, have an overhead line. On these lines, roughly 80% of the kilometers are driven, because obviously it's a question of the busy lines getting, they are obviously the first ones that get overhead lines. So 20% of the traffic is on catenary lines. These are often the rural areas, obviously, and the smaller connections. In Germany, I believe we have around 3,000 diesel trains that could be made clean by battery or by hydrogen. We as Siemens, we are in both technologies, and I cannot say today which one will win. That's the reason why we're in both. I mean, batteries can be used today. We had in Austria the EcoSets, the CityJet Eco running. They can be operated normally today and profitable at distances up to 80-100 kilometers, and then they need recharging, which is not as big of a deal as maybe for cars, because usually at some station you have a catenary line, so you charge it, or you can run it in mixed operation where you're leaving the city, you charge it, and when the overhead line is then not there anymore, you run it on battery. So that can be done. At a certain point, the batteries get too heavy. So 80, 100 kilometers is what makes sense. On hydrogen, Siemens went directly to the what we call second generation hydrogen, and we will have the first train running only in 2024, probably in first operations in 2023 with Deutsche Bahn, which means we took this platform train that has a battery and we installed a hydrogen generator, which charges the battery, which is then a very good technology because it can charge the battery all the time at the optimum performance point of the hydrogen generator, and you can take all the energy short-term also out of the battery, so you have full acceleration of a normal train, so it can absolutely run in mixed operations and everything. It can go much further, up to 800 kilometers between charging. Charging takes 15 minutes like a diesel train, so it could absolutely replace any diesel train, but hydrogen is still an issue today. Hydrogen prices, when you look at manufacturing prices, some say it's twice as much as diesel on the kilometer driven. Some say 4 times as much. When we had the discussion, that was a very interesting one. I thought, how to get truck clean in Germany. People always complain about infrastructure costs on the overhead lines, but actually hydrogen fueling stations are much more expensive. So installing a couple of catenary lines on a truck highway is much cheaper. So the installation of gas stations for hydrogen is an issue. So usually we would think that this would appear firstly in a hydrogen as a service application for specific lines. So you have one central charging station and you run your operations on a certain line and you always come back to the same charging station. So lots of projects coming up right now. All of them have to deal with the fact that at the current time, hydrogen is probably around twice as much as diesel. Of course, this may change drastically in the future, which is why we're experimenting with it. If you could imagine that, I don't know, maybe windmills at nighttime when nobody needs energy because everybody sleeps, maybe they produce hydrogen pretty much for free. If this can be scaled up, or you produce it with sun collectors in the southern areas, something like this, and you transport it just like gas or oil today, then maybe that changes in the next 10 years. Overall, I would say 20,000 vehicles in Europe need to be replaced in the next 10 years because otherwise we will not go to zero emissions.
Francois, would you take the question as well? From a broader perspective of the operators?
My micro is muted. Yes, well, so a few elements. Well, that's a key question that we are investigating in our pledge for carbon neutrality task force, actually. So that's also the reason why I said we were constituting a task force on decarbonation, because what we noticed when we made the first evaluation, and that was noticing, as a sector, we have a red schedule in our decarbonation targets, actually, according to the first pledge that we launched in 2015. So the second pledge is taking another start date, so for the reduction of the emission, meaning that we will go faster to the target of zero emission. And there, it will be absolutely critical to indeed monitor all those questions that are related to price of energy, energy mix, and also level playing field in terms of energy usage. So all of those questions, we will address them within the task force, and also this kind of question will be part of the report I was referring to about new normality. It will be very important to both address, let's say, the demand side. What will be the demand for transport? What will be the change in the demand for transport, in particular in cities? And I also do agree that there is conflicting signals. There is a very concrete one about the fact that car resumed before public transport, but on the other hand, myself living in Paris and being locked more or less in Paris for 1 year, what is also very clear is that the habit for transportation have changed dramatically. For example, in Paris, used to cycle in Paris for years. I think there is 5 to 7 times more cycling people in Paris than before. It's absolutely massive. So expectation regarding the transport mode and cities are changing, as Karen was saying. So that's very difficult to say where it will stabilize. So I think that we have to be relatively humble and take the time to make studies. So that studies are basically what UIC does as a basic activity. And so we will try to have by summer some elements to try to characterize what will be the way forward. But from my point of view, and there, I think that will be something absolutely massive in the future. I think this pandemic has shows to our fellow citizens that our situation was more fragile than everybody was thinking. And I do think that it will be something very important for the political level, accepting both measures. If I take another example, at the French level, we had a citizen forum that were charged to define what will be let's say the ecological strategy for France, and there was a law in the parliament those days. And what was quite interesting is to see that people tend to have a very after they have been working on those subjects, they are very keen to have a trajectory that is towards less carbon in the economy and a model shift that is an actual one. That's very interesting because the people were chosen in a quite representative panel. And that's quite interesting to see that when those people are together in the same room, when they have the occasion to talk and to have the right level of information, they are coming to positions that are quite close to the ones that we have collectively defended today. So there is
May I add one point, Christian?
Yes, please.
Because I think Francois touched upon one important thing when we discussed earlier on the chances maybe that come out of COVID. Personally, I'm a very optimistic person, and I wanted to mention that the change of the shift in modes of transportation that are being used during COVID and afterwards, I see this as a huge opportunity. Look, most metro systems in Europe and I guess in the world are used 20%. They're usually at rush hour, completely packed, and that's how we know them, and then they run empty. So if we use the aftermath of COVID to actually redefine how, as a society, we want to live in our cities, just imagine for a second we could use it more equal over the day and we achieve 40% usage. It still means you have lots of space. It could be very comfortable, but it would mean they don't need subsidies anymore. Right now, usually metro systems are subsidized 50%. They would be profitable. At the same time, you would have space in your streets. And this brings me to the one very important question. I think Karen touched upon it. At some point as a society, we probably have to decide how we want to use the space in our cities. Do we want to give it all to cars, or do we want to have it for people playing, drinking coffee, riding bicycles? And I've discussed with cities in Asia Pacific, and they told me, look, if we have so many car sharing systems here, the next one that gets the license from us, we will tell them, if somebody uses a car to get to the metro station, you have to do it half price. And if the car runs on top of a metro line, which is absolutely not needed, double price. So let's integrate them into the system and create space again and decide how we want to use the space. And the impact could be a huge one, in my opinion, and also from a social point of view. If you think about your own city right now, which are areas you want to live? Usually it's a city that has good connection, but no cars. If you think of a street that has a lot of cars, real estate value usually goes down by a factor 2 or 3. I mean, this is how important the livability is influenced by how we want to use the space. And this is the one aspect about COVID where I think when we come out of this crisis, we rethink transportation and we rethink working patterns and all of these things. There's a huge lever in actually getting a much, much more efficient and sustainable living in the cities.
Okay, Karen, this means the future of urban transportation is bicycling and not hydrogen.
If it's up to me, yes. But this point that Michael just made about space is really, really, really important. And the good thing is that cities are in charge of space, and it's very valuable because it's very scarce, but it also makes them powerful because by taking space away from one mode or by giving more space to another mode, you can really start to decide which modes you want to prioritize in an urban environment. And we know that this respacing that we saw happening during COVID-19 was actually long overdue. The balance between the space taken up by the car and the other modes is so unfair in the urban environment. And we have seen this trend of giving the streets back to the people initiated in a number of cities already. And we have this concept now also of the 15-minute cities, that you try to have all functions and services nearby in an urban environment, which also is done in a way that you don't need your car. It would even be absurd to take your car. It would take you way longer than taking public transport or getting on a bike. So the space dimension is very important, also because we have seen more and more modes coming to our cities over the past years. And the lines between the public and the private sector have been blurring. And what used to be the preserve of the public sector, transport provision, is also now increasingly being taken up by private players, including Flixbus. But the whole micromobility explosion, for example, is another example of that. And when we look at the way this has been handled, there was this public outcry about the e-scooters blocking the way in cities and polluting urban space. But actually what it shows is that there is not enough space for light mobility modes in our cities, because the biggest space polluter is not that tiny e-scooter, it is the private car. And that shows again how we really need to rethink the way we use our space. And the digitalization aspect will also help us to manage that space more dynamically. And maybe depending on the time of the day, the function of the curb, for example, could be different. It could be deliveries in the morning, it could be food trucks over lunch, it could be pickup and drop-off points in the evening for ride-hailing, and it could be bus lanes throughout the day. So the way we dynamically manage that space, that also still has a lot of untapped potential, I think.
Andre, may I ask you, I've seen that Flixbus already has tested e-buses. And my provocative question would be, is this an attempt which has been financed by the PR department, or is it really a strategic attempt which should be turned into a business model? Andre, you're muted. You're muted.
So now the sentence of the pandemic, you're on mute. So definitely it was not a PR topic to do electric buses. We believe we need to test alternative options, and there has to be a decarbonization also of buses and also of trucks. So I think there is no other path. It has to happen. It will not only be rail. Therefore, we need an option. And to be very honest, we had the feeling the OEMs were not progressive enough. And we wanted to make a statement, because if I go to the European OEMs and they tell me it's not possible, it's not a business case, I don't do it. And I say, but Paris will ban CO2 emitting vehicles. The other cities will follow. It will happen. I need it. I need a path towards climate neutrality. And you tell me it's not a business case, then make it a business case. And they don't react. And I mean, we started this project, I would say even 5 years ago. And there was a lot of ignorance on the other side in terms of this will not happen. So the honest answer is we have to turn to Chinese manufacturers, because I mean, it's how the Chinese are. They say, yeah, that's a problem, I'm going to solve it. They will not immediately solve it, but the ambition is there to solve it. So yes, we wanted to have a first live test. It's not scalable. It's not a business case yet, but we believe there has to be a path to make it possible. And on the time frame of 2030 to 2050 somewhere, there has to be a climate neutral option for trucks and buses. And I think now the discussions with the manufacturers are very, very different, because we have proven it's possible. It's not there yet, but I mean, it's 2020. There is a path to go. And the same mind shift that happened on the private vehicles, where I mean, 5 years ago, they all told you that Tesla is a hype, electric mobility is not sustainable, blah, blah, blah. I mean, now everyone has said it's e-mobility first. We get rid of any combustion engine in 2030. And I hope the same momentum we will see a bit later, obviously, for trucks and buses. This is what I really hope. And we wanted to set a trigger, because our vision is, yes, rail, what we do, we will get to climate neutrality, but we also will need buses, and not we as a company, but as a society, trucks. And we will need there a climate neutral option. So yes, it's nothing ready for rollout. And yes, it was a signal, but it was not only a signal to public and to policymakers, it was also a signal to OEMs. You have to move because otherwise others do.
We have another question which was sent in by Lucy Anderton. She was asking, sorry, no, it was not Lucy Anderton, it was Pascal Cancellara, who was asking about the perspectives of short-haul flights in Europe. So we have been already touching the example of France, where Air France has been pledged the funding for the bailout payments, and in turn they needed to reduce their short-haul flights. Do you believe that this is something which is maintainable and will change the perspectives of long-distance bus and rail industry?
I think there is a chance that we can reduce short-haul flights. I think there is a very fair option. I think it's not realistic to say it will not happen that you fly at all short-haul in Europe. I think the infrastructure on rail and is not there like in France. And I mean, the France investment on high-speed infrastructure is also something that you can at least debate if it's the best way forward for the rest of Europe. My question would be most likely not. Yeah, but maybe it worked for France. But yes, I think with a more attractive rail offer, we have an opportunity to really grab market share from low-cost carriers. And this is also, for example, and I also can mainly refer to our company and maybe then, of course, give that back the question on the other options. We see Flixtrain as an affordable and nevertheless sustainable way of transport. And we think this market segment at the moment is catered in many dimensions by the low-cost airlines on domestic flights, for example, in Germany. And we have been competing with Ryanair and EasyJet on Berlin-Cologne, Berlin-Stuttgart, Berlin-Frankfurt. And yes, we see an opportunity with the right regulatory framework that we can introduce a product which is not taking market share from Deutsche Bahn. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I have no problem competition with state rail, but that's not my main target. I think there is something to grab from low-cost airlines. There is a lot to grab from cars. And I'm even not afraid to cannibalize my own services. So yes, I think there is an opportunity that we get back market share that we should have and gain new market share. Therefore, we need the right products and the right regulatory framework.
Okay, thank you for your explanations. There is another question which was sent in by Lucy Anderton, which is related to the competition between the road and rail, which you have been touching also right now, Andre. And the question is, obviously, she's expressing a concern that that the railway industry might fall back because COP26 will be very much focusing on the decarbonization of road transportation. And my question is, we have been investing in and developing two e-mobility companies. And what we have seen 2020 is an immense ramp up of their business. One of the companies is producing software for the billing and invoicing of electric cars charging. They have just recently been awarded by Total, by BP, by a lot of companies, supermarket chains, by the way, and it's really going through the roof. So also listening to the explanations of the industry leaders like Mr. Dies and others, seems that they are really pushing very hard to transform the industry, and they are investing huge amounts of R&D budgets. Just to give you a figure, we're always talking about Samsung and Apple as the leaders in R&D spendings. But the real champion is Volkswagen Group. I think if I have it correctly in mind, they are spending at least $13 million per year for R&D activities. So it's a massive endeavor which they are doing. As a railway guy, I always got the impression that the industry is definitely falling behind. Because even if I combine the R&D funds of all the European OEMs, and Mr. Peter, please correct me, this won't add up to $30 million.
30 million or billion?
So sorry, it's billion, of course. Yeah, 13
okay.
billion.
No,
13 billion
that probably won't reach.
yeah. So that was my question. How don't you believe that they are not only catching up with regard to e-mobility, but even overtaking public transportation?
Yeah, I think, again, a little bit like before, we should try not to make enemies where we don't need enemies. I do think that also the car has its place in moving people around. The question is, does everybody need an individual car in the city center? Maybe, yeah. But in the rural areas, if it's a car that is actually driving clean energy, why not? Yeah, it's really also the foundation of much of our wealth and freedom that we enjoy today. In the cities, I think the car industry still plays a vital role because just of the power they have to develop batteries, to develop electric drives, and so on and so forth. One huge solution to the cities would be, of course, driverless minibuses. If we can always put 4 or 5 people in a bus and they pick up the people that are standing in the same place and want to go to the same place because they booked the trip to an app, and I know they want to go out to the opera, so I pick those people up. And we could resolve transportation in the city in a very clean way, comfort level higher than an own car, cheaper than public transportation. But some of these technologies are also developed by the car industry. Is rail falling behind? I don't think so. I think rail has the advantage that per se it's clean, so it's not this completely new development that we need. And of course, for my company, I can say we hugely benefit from the fact that we also are in digital industry. So much of our digitalization that we have is in cybersecurity, artificial intelligence to predict if a door fails. Is it 3D printing to produce spare parts? Obviously, we also get from across the industry. So I don't see myself in a direct competition in the sense of R&D spend. We resolve the issue. I think the main issue in Europe, rebuilding the infrastructure, which has been neglected on the rail side for many years. We've worn it down, and that will cost money. And digitalizing it to really not talk about delay minutes anymore, but talk about additional capacity and ease of scheduling additional trains, connecting the trains. And last but not least, I'm sorry, I'm coming back to my opening statement, but homologation. I mean, with this nightmare, if you buy a car, just imagine you buy a car and then you buy it in Germany and you want to drive to France and you have to get out. You need a different car and a different driver. I mean, that's the reality without EPCS that we are facing. And this will never beat any airplane if this remains like this. So we need to change this. The train that is homologated needs to be able to run in Europe and then needs to be run with one signaling system only. And I think this is not only killing us on the supplier side because we waste energy in really unnecessary, not for the passenger useful stuff, but it also kills the operators. I mean, I know a lot of operators, be it ÖBB, DB, but the French, they would love to run across the borders. But every time you want to cross the border, it's a political issue almost.
That's one of the most curious aspects because when I have been designated as the CEO of ÖBB, we have been discussing this second, third, fourth railway package. And 11 years later, we are still talking about the implementation of it, and we have just seen some very minor progress. Francois, you have presented in your initial statement that we need really a massive push and not just step-by-step incremental improvements for the industry sector. So why is it so difficult from your experience to join forces between the OEMs, the operators, politics, or the regulatory bodies and to launch an aligned attempt?
Well, that's quite a question, but if I can perhaps come back a little bit to the previous question, what is quite important to understand, from my point of view at least, is that if we continue to be indeed first in the confrontation of modes and in having every sector in its line, I think we will not get any progress. I do think that the main question, and it was very well explained by Kai van Krusen, in cities, the main question is air quality and congestion. frankly, if you change your diesel car by an electric car, well, you will have a little bit less pollution. That's that for sure. But the congestion will not disappear. And this crucial question of what do we want as a city, as a public space, will not be solved either. So I do think that if we want to have an effect on society, we really need to have a very strong, let's say, societal and in a way political message. I think what is underlying, and it's after all quite logical under individual vehicle, is this impression of liberty. That means, and it's not completely an impression, if you are in a rural area, you have no cars, you have no liberty to move. But in a city, it's quite debatable. So I do think what we have to do is, first of all, to change the expectations, and also to be able together to try to program a little bit what will be the investment in order to be sure that they will really change emissions and energy consumption. And I do think that in this respect, when you look, for example, to the rate of renewal of the pool of individual cars in our society, it's very slow. So that means even if there will be only electrical cars in 2030, the actual effect will be 10 to 15 years later on the emission. On the other hand, if you have a way to foster a modal shift, then you have an effect that is very rapid if you really do that with all the tools that we have at our disposal. And one of these tools is also what can be done at the city level, what can be done on the town planning, what can be done to enter into the cities and so far and so on, what can be done on the fiscal side. So I think we have to have an holistic approach. And in saying that, I don't, it's not an attack to have important budget for making cleaner the automotive sector, because the automotive sector is not clean, so they need to invest. So that's very good that they invest. But we don't have to forget that if we want to be efficient rapidly, we need to change the perception. When it comes to the question of accelerating the pace of digitalization and innovation in the right ways, well, I think that I'm there again, not primarily a question of technique. We are all technical people in the sector, and we know what to do, but a change in the mind shift. The mindset of the actors. I think what we experience now in the operators, that they have understood that competition is unavoidable. So as competition is unavoidable, they need to have a consistent network over the whole Europe. They cannot avoid any more competition. They have to make it simple. It has begun with freight. In freight, they have perfectly understood that they will not survive if they don't have common digital platforms, if they not have common way of operating. And it's coming slowly on the passenger side. And I do think, and I can already send that within UIC, because we have all the operators there, that they will really make an integration of the European network. And I think if we do that, and if there is more, to say it bluntly, more confidence from the European Commission and the European Railway Agency on the capacity of the actors to have a concerted way of implementing the change and the new and the innovation, I do think that we can have results quite rapidly. And for example, for an example of what is happening, I think what is happening now with the new shift to rail, which now will be called Europe Rail JU. You can see that there is a very strong implication of the networks. When you look at the core team, there is a good balance between operators and manufacturers. And I think that's a sign that indeed all the operators are committed to make that happen. And I do hope that quite rapidly we will see the effect of this new commitment.
Okay, so finally, I have just one question left due to the fact that the audience has paid a lot of money to listen to our panel discussion. Andre, I would like to direct the last question to you. Your company has been funded by venture capital, and if you would have to give your investors an advice to spend more money in the railway value chain, what would you tell them? Because what I see is we see a lot of exits on NASDAQ from automotive companies. Take Mobileye, the biggest exit in Israel, 13 billion was the price which was paid by Intel for the company, but we don't know similar examples in the rail industry.
That's a very interesting question. Actually, I had to think about it for a second while you were talking. I think with all the tailwinds we have as a rail industry in Europe, I think betting on the people who supply the ecosystem is a safe bet. So I would not be shy of buying Siemens shares or investing in anyone who supplies like infrastructure. So I think that's a pretty fair bet if you're not waiting for a NASDAQ exit, but a safe development, because I think there is a clear political commitment. And on back of this commitment, I think there will be investment made. If you're a bullish investor, you can bet on an operator, but there aren't too many. So yes, I think there is room for a success story in rail, not only for an individual company, but with all the political tailwind. If we use it well, if we have the right markets in place, I think people will look back in 20, 30 years and say we changed the mobility landscape for good. And I think this is not only an opportunity, but also something that we should take as a task at hand.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your contributions. It was really interesting. I learned a lot. Hopefully, the audience shares the same impression. I would like to thank you very much. All of you, thank you very much for listening and attending the panel. And I would like now to hand it back to Simon and the moderator of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you.
Christian,
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Christian, thank you very much indeed. And thanks to everybody, of course, in the panel there for exchanging, for sharing all of the insights that you have. And I think it's been a very fruitful and indeed enlightening discussion. Couple of takeaways there, of course. Ladies and gentlemen, that draws a conclusion to that particular panel. But I can tell you that we have two further sessions this afternoon before we conclude this second day of IRS 10. They both start at 4:30. They are running in parallel. One is under the infrastructure heading and the other is under the rail operations heading. We have one which is dealing with shaping attractive and sustainable spaces for tomorrow's passengers. Quite clearly, without the end user, there is no point running a railway. And so therefore there is that is a very interesting topic, and that will be moderated by my colleague Lucy Anderton from the UIC. And then there is a second session which also starts at 4:30, which is what will come after the fourth railway package, and so is looking very much more at the legislative framework and the regulatory framework. And in that panel there, we will have people such as Joseph Doppelbauer from the European Railway, the Executive Director of the European Railway Agency. And that will be moderated by Michael Stahlhut, who is the CEO of HUPAC. So two very interesting topics there for you to participate in. But right now, have a little break, and we'll see you all at 4:30 for one or other of those sessions. Thank you very much.
And